Good morning. Welcome back. And we're going to start the very final lecture in the course, which is about how people use language rather than about the actual literal use of language, which is what we've been doing for pretty much this entire course. We're going to jump into pragmatics. And instead of having a generic lecture about Grice's maxims and the rules of conversation that we follow, we're going to talk about humor, and we're going to talk about Grice's maxims, introduce them again. Well, I say again, they might be new for some of you, they might be review for some of you, but we're going to relate them to jokes and humor instead of just talking about them generically in linguistics. So take a little spin on it. That's something different, because I know that whoever teaches 282 and who teaches 220, sometimes pragmatics and Grice's maxims are done. So if you haven't seen them before, if you have seen them before, we'll do a little twist on it in this course.
Sorry, is today the last day of class or there's Tuesday?
Tuesday as well. So we'll do an hour today, and then we'll probably finish in an hour on Tuesday, and then we'll wrap up the course on Tuesday. And then Friday will be that third test. Next Friday is the official last day of class for this course, but we'll just use it to do the last test instead of taking it over into the exam period. So we'll start with a little definition of the different types of jokes that there are. And some of this stuff, I should say that most of the stuff that I'm taking is from psychology rather than linguistics. There's not that much stuff in linguistics that is agreed upon by a lot of linguists. So if you take a look for the linguistics of humor or the linguistics of jokes, every linguist who writes a textbook or writes papers will classify different types of jokes or look at incongruities in different ways. So what I've done is I've taken a look at psychology books and a couple different ways that linguists have done it, and just sort of found some general consensus that's a nice, easy way for us to deal with things. Because this stuff is studied a lot more in psychology than in linguistics from what I've been able to see. So humor is just anything that makes people laugh. And as you know, there's things that are intentional and things that are unintentional. So in psychology, humor is classified according to what the purpose of the joke is. So I'll just run you through a few of these examples, but this isn't really how we're going to be classifying things, because we want to approach it from a linguistic perspective. So we would say that there are jokes that come from, say, irony. So you can be ironic when what you say literally isn't what you actually mean. Sometimes this is expressed as sarcasm. So the words sarcasm and irony are often used interchangeably by lay people. So sarcasm would be like aggressive irony or mocking irony. Like, yeah, you really look good in that dress, when maybe someone looks awful in that dress. So what you say is the opposite of what you mean. While irony would be like non-offensive. So yeah, the weather's nice today while it's raining outside. That's what people would think irony is. And that's what psychologists have declared that irony is too. Although in literary terms, I think irony is a little bit different. So the irony in humor and the irony in literary terms may have slightly different definitions. Satire is something you would see on like sketch shows like Saturday Night Live, if you want to classify that as humor. So a lot of satire is like political. It takes ideas and it just pushes them to the extreme. It's like, we're going to implement this policy, and here are some of the absurd things that come out of it. And they just push it way further than it would actually happen in real life. Self-deprecating jokes. These are fantastic. It's my favorite form of humor, but I'm just terrible at it. But I do it anyway. So any sort of joke that insults yourself to make other people laugh, that's a self-deprecating joke. Puns. These are linguistically fun. So these are words that have two different meanings, two different interpretations. Like, we'll see some examples of puns. And then we have things like canned jokes. So canned jokes are great because these are like little jokes that don't need any specific context. You can just memorize the joke and they can be brought out in any situation. So they usually have like a couple lines as a setup, and then they have your punchline. So the thing that makes people laugh. So sometimes you have canned jokes that incorporate irony or irony or sarcasm or self-deprecation or puns. So these aren't all mutually exclusive. Yeah, a lot of stand-up jokes are canned. So they're rehearsed jokes that are tested and prepared for stand-up because they're insured to make people laugh, at least at the professional level. When you see people go up on stage at like a local bar or something when they're doing comedy night and anyone can go up, a lot of those aren't canned. Those are just people coming up with jokes on the spot. And that's why, I mean, they're not tested. So a lot of them bomb. Okay, so that's like from a humor perspective, a psychology perspective, from a definition of the type of jokes, that's how you could classify some of them. And there's a lot more ways we could classify jokes, and depending on who you talk to and what paper you read, they might put these into more categories or less categories. But we want to talk about these in terms of linguistics. So what is causing the joke? So is a joke caused by something phonological in nature? Is it the sounds in a word that's making a joke? Is it a morpheme or word that's making a joke? Is it the sentence structure or an interpretation of a phrase that's causing a joke? Or is it something pragmatic? What we mean by pragmatic, is it something about an expectation about language or about real life that is causing the joke? So we won't spend too much time on pragmatic jokes just because these cover a very broad category, but we will talk about one specific type of pragmatic joke. So we'll talk about phonological, lexical, morphological, syntactic, and pragmatic separately, and we'll give a couple examples of each of those types of jokes. And of course, as I explain the jokes, they will lose all of their funniness. That's just what happens. And some of them aren't even funny to begin with, but they're really good at explaining the point of what the incongruity is. So although we use the term joke and we say that humor is something that makes someone laugh, some of these jokes are not funny, but we still call them jokes. So first, we should probably define what linguistic and non-linguistic humor is. Like, what are some jokes that we would talk about versus jokes that we just aren't concerned with? So linguistic humor is obviously any sort of humor that happens because of language. And non-linguistic humor would be something that does not happen because of language. So I want to talk about the non-linguistic humor first. So I'll start at the bottom of the slide here. So non-linguistic humor, this would be stuff like physical humor, of course. This is the most obvious example. When you do something like, I don't know, you go on YouTube and you watch a Vine compilation or a TikTok compilation of kids falling. Those are hilarious. So that's physical humor. There's nothing linguistic to analyze there. It's just people falling. There's sometimes observational humor where this is borderline linguistic, non-linguistic, but sometimes if you're in a weird situation or just an abnormal situation, you can just say something truthful and it's funny because you're just the one pointing out what's happening. So you're not really doing anything interesting linguistically. You're just pointing out the obvious, and that just happens to be funny because you're saying what everyone else is thinking. There's this term that I'm sort of introducing myself here called shock value humor. Um, I think we've all seen comedians or clips or at least know of some comedies or movies where the whole point of a joke is just to say something like rude or vulgar for the sake of being rude or vulgar. And sure, in linguistics, we analyze cursing, but it's not that interesting to us, at least today. Why something that's incredibly rude or vulgar is funny to some people. So instead, we're going to focus on the stuff that's more linguistically interesting and has, this is something we can analyze. So there are two types. So linguistic humor is something that we can look at with language. And there's intentional humor. So this is when we're intentionally trying to make a joke. And there's accidental humor. And in language, a lot of accidental linguistic humor comes from speech errors. And it always depends on the person making the speech errors, whether or not they're going to find it funny too. But there's just something inherently funny sometimes about, oh, they got the word wrong. That evokes laughter, or oh, they messed some sounds up. So here are two types of speech errors that people make that sometimes people find humorous. So one of these are called malapropisms. So a malapropism is when you use the wrong word. And usually you pick a word that sounds very similar to the one that you want to pick. But your brain is searching for a word. It says, oh, this one, it's close enough. It's close enough. So you use that word instead. Okay, so how these are working in the structure of these slides is in black, I have the thing that's actually being said. And in light brown, I'm trying to explain the joke or what's supposed to have been said. So a malapropism example here is saying, I have good punctuation, I'm never late. So this is just a speech error. I have good punctuation. What the person means to say is, I have good punctuality, I'm never late. But because the person has picked the wrong word, they've used a malapropism, some people might laugh in conversation. Some people might not even catch it because the word is so similar that you just hear punch and you're like, okay, that's the right word. Another type of speech error that's often pretty funny and one that I make quite a bit myself is a spoonerism. There's other types of speech errors that hold sounds or preserve sounds. So, I mean, we can classify these all as spoonerisms for our purposes. But this is when you swap sounds and words. So, for example, is it customary to cuss the bride? So this is when the first parts of the words customary and kiss have been swapped. So instead of saying customary to kiss, you're saying customary to cuss. And sometimes this is just humorous. And these are almost always accidental. So speech errors are something that is usually pretty difficult to fake. Some stand-up comedians do it, but they're really good at it. You have to be able to practice these well if you're going to fake it. But most of the time, these are accidental, and sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. It depends on the person, and it depends on the circumstance, of course. So, I mean, if you take a course like I think LING 415, or LING 290, or maybe not LING 290, but I think in 415 you might talk about speech errors some more. So you might actually talk about malapropisms and spoonerisms. I'm not sure. It might depend on who teaches it. But anyway, before we talk about phonological, lexical, morphological, syntactic, and pragmatic jokes, I want to talk about one little model in psychology about humor and this term incongruity. So whenever we have a joke, so let's start with like a canned joke. Let's just introduce what this is. There's usually like two parts to a canned joke. There's like a setup and a punchline. So these two parts are important because what the setup is doing is it's creating an expectation. So if you think about this as like a path in a forest, for example, it's sort of leading you down one line. So a setup is taking you down this one path. And when the punchline comes, so when the joke comes, what's happening is the punchline is saying, actually, you should have been walking down this path the entire time. So the meaning that comes from the punchline, the interpretation that you get, is different than the one that you were expecting. That's what makes jokes funny, according to one model in psychology, which is the model we're going to assume for our sake because it's a nice, simple model. So this difference, your expectation versus the actual meaning that is the punchline in the joke, is called the incongruity. So, or gives you an incongruity. It creates incongruity would be the best way to put it. So your expectation is going in one direction, the actual meaning that you're supposed to get goes in the other direction. Because you're realizing that you were taken down the wrong path, you resolve your incongruity and then you laugh. That's sort of the basic model here. Because you realize you were misled, you're like, haha, I was misled. That's funny. This also explains why when you hear a joke repeatedly, you don't find it funny anymore. Because once you hear a joke over and over again, you now know that you're supposed to be taking the other path. So there's no longer an incongruity. So you don't laugh because there's no incongruity to resolve. You know where you're supposed to go. You know which meaning you're supposed to get. So there's no difference that makes you laugh. So with canned jokes, there's like this setup that you get. There's usually a couple lines where they tick you into the story and you're trying to piece it together in your mind. But with a lot of linguistic jokes, like let's take a spoonerism or a malapropism, accidental humor, or just a pun, which is usually just one line. It might even be one phrase. There's no setup. There's no explicit setup. Instead, the setup is more like abstract in a way. It's more about your basic understanding of language. The setup is the knowledge of the grammar itself. It's the knowledge of pragmatics. It's the knowledge of syntax. It's the knowledge of phonology. So the setup is the understanding of language. And this is like subconscious understanding. So this is why linguistic jokes can still be analyzed with this model. It's just that the setup itself is language. It's your own internal understanding of language. So sort of one of the basic models of psychological humor that we'll take is that humor comes from the fact that we have an expectation about how language works and how we should interpret it. So we're led down one path. We're told, actually, this is what we mean over here. So this difference, this incongruity makes it funny. When you don't get a joke, does that mean you don't solve the incongruity? So in this model, that's sort of what happened. It's like you don't solve the incongruity because you don't understand the intended meaning, or you don't really understand the path that you were led down. It's sort of like you got stuck at a point and you said, where am I supposed to go? Or you get to the end point and you said, well, where was I supposed to be? Like you just don't get it. So there's nothing to resolve. Yeah, so you're on, yeah, you've got that there. You don't know how to resolve it, so there's no humor there. Yeah, you have to be able to, you have to be aware of this gap. And you have to be able to close that gap to laugh. That's sort of the assumption of the model. Sorry, I shouldn't say that's sort of, that is the assumption of the model. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples then. So we'll start with phonological incongruity. So these are jokes that arise due to phonology. And I do have one sexual joke in 4. It's my only one in the course, but there's actually a point to it. I'll get to it. Okay, so we'll start with some basic ones. So jokes can arise because of homonyms. So I'll just talk about the first joke first. So why do people become bakers? Oh, they need the dough. Oh, it's hilarious. Okay, so this joke happens because the words need and need are both translated or both pronounced in the same way, but they're spelled differently. So this is actually important in terms of classifying the jokes. So the fact that there are 2 spellings, but one pronunciation makes this a phonological incongruity. So you hear the word need. So sorry. There's another thing here. Dough also means money. This is lexical. We'll talk about that later. But you hear they need the dough, but you're thinking like, okay, bakers need things, but then you think, oh, there's this other meaning of need, which is like require. Oh, look, need has 2 different possible meanings here. It's funny, haha. So the fact that you have one pronunciation with 2 different English words or 2 different lexical items, that's a phonological incongruity. Here's another one which is a little bit more involved. So a teacher's teaching a class and teaching some new words. So a teacher says, an anecdote is a tale. Now Sydney use it in a sentence. So Sydney says, I tied a tin to the dog's anecdote. So in this case, Sydney is interpreting tale. So the pronunciation, I should use real IPA, tale. So she is interpreting this as the word tale rather than, of course, what is written here as tale, as in story. So when she replies, she says dog's anecdote to mean dog's tale. So this is another case of phonological incongruity because the words tail and tail, as in dog's tail, the waggy thing, and the story thing, are spelled differently, but they're pronounced the same. So same pronunciation, 2 different words. So we see these types of jokes pretty often online. Now, there's the second type of phonological incongruity that is really interesting. Like from a sociolinguistic perspective. And that's that we can get humor that arises from differences in pronunciation across like languages or dialects. Usually dialects of the same language so that we can understand things. Like when we listen to, say, Irish people or British people speak English, we might hear them say things and we find it funny because they talk a little bit differently, and we might hear them say a word and we interpret it different than them, or they might use different words in their language that we just think are funny. Like, I don't know, maybe like a car park we think is funny because we think of a bunch of cars playing on a playground. I don't know, instead of a parking lot. But what's really interesting about this type of humor is that this humor only exists across speech communities. This type of humor is not understood within a speech community. In fact, you would not find it within a speech community. And that's because, let's say in the American bubble, everyone speaks or speaks similarly in like a speech community. So I really shouldn't say American because there's so many different dialects, but okay, let's just do Western Canadian English. And then let's say we have like British English. Within these bubbles, we understand each other. It's not until we have a Western Canadian English speaker listening to British English, or a British English speaker listening to Western Canadian English, that they would even notice or even find a joke in how we speak, or even find some humor. Because it takes one person going into a different community where things are pronounced differently in order to interpret something differently. So I'll show you these two jokes. So the first one is appropriate, the second one's not. Okay, so an American goes to Ireland and says, "How many males are there a day in this hotel?" And then the Irish porter responds, "3, sir, breakfast, dinner, and tay." So this is supposed to be tea. I just wrote it as tay. But the idea here is that in Ireland, the E, as in meals, and T is pronounced more like A. So this is pronounced differently than in Canadian English. So we would say meals, but in Ireland, they say males. We say tea, they say tay. So when an American says males a day, like how many times do they get letters? This joke doesn't really make much sense. It's more of a demonstration. When an American says males, the Irish interpret this as meals because this is how they pronounce things. So this is something that you would never get inside of the United States, like ever. This would not happen. This has to be one person in a different speech community where things are pronounced differently. Now, here's a really stupid Australian joke. An Australian says, "My new deck can handle about 20 people at once," and an American laughs. So if you've never heard Australian people talk before, Australian English has this thing called the eh merger. So when they say the words pin and the words pen, they sound exactly the same. So these sound exactly the same. So it sounds like, I need a pin, pin. Good luck transcribing it. A bin. So don't need to explain this, but when they say the word deck, there's another word that sounds just like deck that is indistinguishable to American speakers. But to Australian speakers, they would use context and they would know exactly what's being said, which is the word deck. But an American or a Canadian speaker would hear that and they'd probably laugh right away because it doesn't sound like the word deck. It sounds like something with an I in it. So again, that's something that an Australian would never find funny and they would never notice. But it's something that a Canadian or an American would notice because it's not a phonological pattern that we're used to. So we get phonological incongruity there that is like almost completely accidental and is a result of like two different speech communities interacting with each other. So I think this is just incredible. And what's really amazing about this is that this is something that could not have been really studied 30 years ago, 40 years ago, widely. This is something that the general public might not have noticed as easily because we didn't have access to the internet 30, 40 years ago. We couldn't interact with people on a daily basis and hear these accents all the time and have so many situations where we could talk to people. All we had were like, movies, the media, or you had to travel. You didn't just have free access to all these different speech communities in the world. So now we can actually find more examples of this type of humor. Okay, so this is the different type of phonological incongruities we can get. So just two examples, homonyms and like cross-cultural humor. Any questions about this type or anything we've talked about so far? I realize I just talked for 30 minutes without taking a break for questions. Okay, let's move on to lexical and morphological incongruity. I'm lumping these together, and that's because lexical means word and morphological means morpheme. And what is a word? I mean, that's a hard question to answer. That's not our question to answer, so we're just going to consider them the same thing because a word is technically sometimes a word is one morpheme, sometimes a word is multiple morphemes, depends on the language. So they're the same thing. Take LING 323 if you want to talk about what a word is. You'll find out after 13 weeks. That's a horribly difficult question to answer. Okay, so lexical ambiguity or morphological ambiguity is what causes a lot of these lexical morphological incongruities in humor. So here's an example where a word has different meanings. I'm sure you've seen this one before. Two cannibals are eating a clown. One says to another, "Does this taste funny to you?" So this is because funny can have the meaning of weird, and it also has the meaning of haha. And we're talking about clowns here. So the clown is the haha funny, and the weird is like the tasting funny. So it's lexically ambiguous because both meanings can be understood in the sentence. So the interpretation you're supposed to get is like the weird tasting, but then the joke is that you're talking about clowns and clowns are supposed to be funny. So this is the incongruity that you resolve. Yeah, it's funny. Real good. I've seen these too many times myself. I just don't laugh anymore. So that's an example of a word, but we can do these with morphemes too. So this is one that I didn't even understand the first time I saw this. I had to actually look this up because I was so unaware of this. So person A and person B are talking. Person A says, "Are you unmarried, lady?" And B says, "Unmarried? I've never been married." So the joke here is that the prefix "un" can have two meanings. One is like, I had never been married before. So sorry, like unmarried is like not married. So that's like one meaning. And the second meaning is like was married and then no longer married. So to be unmarried would be like to be married and then to reverse that process. So like there's two different meanings for that morpheme un there, which is what makes the joke. Because you're expecting like, are you unmarried to mean single? And then instead, person B responds, I have never been married, which is like not what we expect them to say. Like, why is that relevant? Oh, it's because un has the second meaning, which is like an extremely uncommon use of the word un in this circumstance, which is why I didn't get it. So that goes back to Deborah's question earlier. When you don't get a joke, that does that mean you don't solve the incongruity? Yeah, I didn't solve that incongruity there because I just didn't get what the incongruity was. So there's an example of a morpheme, and up here was an example of a word. So we can have humor in that direction too. When we talk about syntax and syntactic incongruities, there are two types of syntactic incongruities, and they're separated into surface structure jokes and deep structure jokes. Now, you don't need to concern yourself with the difference between the two. I'm just illustrating surface and deep structure. So that way, if you know 322 material and have worked with deep structure in more depth, you can get a little bit more out of it. But you just need to know syntactic incongruity. So surface structure jokes occur because of how the sentence comes out. So just what is being spoken due to word order or due to how the parsing is interpreted. So for example, here's a really nice example for interpretation in terms of word categories. I saw a man eating shark in the aquarium. Oh, that's nothing. I saw a man eating herring in the restaurant. Okay, so we hear man eating shark in the aquarium. So man eating is like an adjective here that's describing the shark. So we're set up for this word category interpretation. So then when we hear that's nothing, I saw a man eating herring in the restaurant. When we hear man eating herring, what we're expecting is an adjective followed by a noun. We're expecting that same sort of pattern. But actually what we're getting is we get a noun here, and then we're led into this relative clause. So we're led into this verb and another noun. So a man who was eating herring in the restaurant. So the incongruity here is like which word categories we were expecting. We were expecting an adjective and a noun, but instead we got this noun with this relative clause. So this second interpretation was unexpected, causing the incongruity, which makes it funny. And the only reason we're able to figure that out is because we hear in the restaurant, and then that gives us context, and we like, oh, it's the man eating herring in the restaurant. Haha. Okay, this is a fun, I actually like this one. So it's late at night, a security officer is working. One of his friends wants to surprise him. So he knocks on the door. The security says, who's there? The friend replies, it's me, jackass. And the security says, oh, it's just you, jackass. So whenever we say something like me or you or say a name, jackass here can be interpreted as either an insult or it can be interpreted as a name. Like it's me, Trevor, or it's me, idiot, like, you know, whatever. And then when the security responds, he treats it the same way. Instead of treating it as an insult, he treats it as a name, which is causing the incongruity because we expect it to be an insult, but then the security officer is treating it as a name instead. So this is also like a syntactic category thing. Here's a little term. Whenever we see things like, it's me, Derek, This is called a vocative or a vocative, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So in this case, this is how the term jackass is being interpreted here. It's being interpreted as a vocative instead of like just another word that is an insult. Okay, so deep structure humor is a little bit different. To put it very simply, because we're not, this isn't 322. When we set up a sentence structure, there's an initial constituency in the tree that happens before movement occurs that puts the sentence in the proper word order. So where this is important is for idioms. So in the deep structure of a tree, idioms behave differently than, say, a verb and a direct object. So how the words are put together in deep structure can give you different meanings. So we're not going to talk about the details, but the key word that you should know if you're interested about like what is a deep structure joke, they're just jokes that make use of idioms, essentially. So imagine like here we have a sign in a tailor shop that says, please have a fit upstairs. So have a fit is idiomatic in English, but it can also be taken literally. So in a tailor shop, when you say have a fit, the expectation is that this is the literal interpretation, where you have the verb have, and then you have a fit, which is an object. So this is when you get fitted for your clothes, which would make sense in a tailor shop. But have a fit is also idiomatic to mean be upset. So that's the joke here, is that the interpretation that you're supposed to get is to get fitted into clothes, but then there's this other interpretation to be upset that you hear when you see please have a fit, and the fact that this has two meanings makes it funny. So this is slightly different than 7 and 8, just because this occurs because of what's happening in deep structure rather than what happens at the end of the tree in surface structure. Because in surface structure, when you say it out loud, the trees look identical. And that's why I say we're not going to go into the details, because we'd have to draw the trees and see that, but just take my word for it. The trees would look identical in this case compared to 7 and 8, where the trees would look different. But again, you're not responsible for the difference between surface and deep structure, but in case you're interested, that's sort of the difference there. Okay, are there any questions about what we've talked about so far? We just have one more thing, but I thought we'd pause there before we talk about pragmatic humor.
So for number 7, why does the speaker say that's nothing?
Oh, it's sort of like you're sort of like one-upping another person. Like, oh, I did this. Oh, well, that's nothing. I did something even better. It's just sort of like an English phrase used in that circumstance.
So is that person thinking the man eating herring is like a more surprising thing than man eating shark?
Yeah, it's more impressive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's part of the joke in that case. Well, it's supposed to be. Okay, so this last one, covers a lot of different types of jokes, but I just want to focus on the time aspect because it goes into last week as well, but it's something that we talked about back in propositional logic too. So anything with the expectation of time can be involved with pragmatic incongruity. So here's a very classic joke. You're listening to the radio and they say, call 555-5555 for more information on getting a lobotomy. And now the winner of the do-it-yourself competition. So when we hear two sentences back to back, usually we interpret some sort of connection with them. So more information on getting a lobotomy and now the winner of the do-it-yourself competition, we infer a connection between the two. So we expect that the winner has something to do with getting a lobotomy. So the winner did his own lobotomy. This is sort of like the joke here. So this goes back to the sentence of like, marriage and pregnant versus pregnant and marriage, where we said that this is like an expectation. This isn't truth. It's just an expectation. So we can get a lot of jokes out of this just by the fact that when we say sentences back to back, we expect some sort of congruity between them. We expect our sentences to flow in time. So just by virtue of time, we're being led down one path, but actually they're unrelated. It's just commercial and an extra statement that causes an incongruity, and that's funny. So again, that's not something that's obviously true. I mean, these aren't linked. That's what I mean when I say they aren't. It's not obviously true. They're not linked together. It's just an expectation. That's why when we translated in propositional logic 2, we didn't actually say there was a time relation between pregnant and married, and married and pregnant, because it's just an expectation. It's not a fact. Okay, but pragmatics and pragmatic humor can cover a lot more. So really any expectation about how we use language, like any humor related to politeness, like if someone's incredibly rude to you, like in customer service, and you're sarcastic back and you say, well, thank you for being so polite. We can get some humor there too. But we'll just focus on temporal incongruity when it comes to pragmatic humor, again, just to keep things simple in this last week. So that's all I wanted to do for today, which takes us just up to the hour. On Tuesday, we're going to talk about Grice's maxims and how we can get more types of humor out of the maxims themselves. So if you don't know what those are, don't worry, we'll cover those on Tuesday. But if you do know, look forward to that. Because that's more examples of pragmatic humor that isn't just temporal incongruity. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. Other than that, I'll see you next week. And is there anything else? Oh yeah, the learning and reinforcement only is due on Tuesday. So if you don't get understanding and extension by then, of course, that's fine. That's due the week after. You can get it in by Tuesday. But the learning and reinforcement questions are due by Tuesday. Please look at the lecture page for what is it? Why is my mind blanking right now? Look at the lecture page on Canvas for truth conditional meaning of quantified sentences, and look at the extra practice examples for composition with two quantifiers and the pronoun sentences if you need help with those sentences, because the examples are quite similar with those practice questions. And I mean, there's some more examples in terms of lecture. So in addition to the ones in lecture. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words a lot today. But yeah, other than that, enjoy the weekend. There's a heat wave, so watch out for that. If it waves to you, wave back, but stay cool. So see you next week. And haha, my original joke today. That was awful. I apologize. Anyways, enjoy your day.